The Christmas celebration turned into her worst nightmare. Then the Vampire King made his entrance. The snow fell in thick, lazy flakes outside the frost-etched windows of Wintermere Estate, transforming the December night into a scene from a Victorian postcard. Margaret Ashford pressed her forehead against the cold glass, watching the white blanket accumulate on the sprawling grounds below. Behind her, the annual Christmas gala was in full swing. Crystal chandeliers blazed with golden light, champagne flutes clinked in endless toasts, and laughter echoed through the mansion's vaulted ceilings. She should have felt festive. Instead, an inexplicable dread coiled in her stomach like a serpent. "Margaret, darling, you're being terribly antisocial." Her cousin, Penelope, appeared at her elbow, resplendent in emerald silk that matched her calculating eyes. "This is your party, after all. The least you could do is pretend to enjoy it." Margaret forced a smile. "Just needed a moment, the crowd is overwhelming." "Well, brace yourself, Darius is looking for you." Penelope's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "He has something important to discuss, apparently." Before Margaret could respond, her cousin had already glided away, leaving behind a trail of expensive perfume and unspoken tension. Darius Blackwell, her fiancé of 6 months, was probably ready to announce their engagement officially. It was the logical next step. His family's shipping company complemented her late father's railroad empire perfectly. On paper, they were an ideal match. So why did the thought of marrying him make her feel like she was drowning? "There you are, my dear." Darius materialized beside her, his hand possessively gripping her elbow. Handsome in a conventional way, with slicked-back blonde hair and a practiced smile, he was everything her family could want, everything she was supposed to want. "Darius," she kept her voice steady, "Penelope said you were looking for me." "Indeed, I have a surprise." His grey eyes gleamed with something she couldn't quite identify. "Come with me to the conservatory. I've arranged something special." Warning bells rang in Margaret's mind, but she allowed herself to be led through the crowd. Guests parted before them, the Ashford heiress and her distinguished fiancé. They probably made a beautiful picture. The thought tasted bitter. The conservatory was at the far end of the estate, a glass-domed sanctuary filled with exotic plants her father had collected from around the world. During the day, it was Margaret's favourite retreat. At night, with shadows pooling between the palms and ferns, it felt almost sinister. Darius had arranged candles throughout the space, their flames casting dancing shadows on the glass walls. It should have been romantic. Instead, Margaret's sense of unease intensified. "This is lovely," she said carefully, "but shouldn't we return to the party? People will wonder." "Let them wonder." Darius turned to face her, and for the first time she saw something raw and ugly beneath his polished exterior. "I've been patient long enough, Margaret. 6 months of playing the gentleman, courting you properly, doing everything by the book." "I don't understand." "Of course you don't." He laughed, but there was no humour in it. "You've been so wrapped up in your precious books and charitable projects, you never noticed what was happening right under your nose." Cold fear trickled down her spine. "What are you talking about?" "Your father's empire, your fortune, everything you inherited when he died so conveniently." Darius circled her slowly, like a predator stalking prey. "Did you ever wonder about that carriage accident? How the axle just happened to break on that particular road at that particular time?" Margaret's breath caught. "You're saying, no, that's insane." "Is it?" He pulled a folded document from his jacket. "Sign this, Margaret. Transfer power of attorney to me. We'll marry tonight, I have a minister waiting. By morning, everything you own will be under my control." "You're mad." She backed away, but he matched her step for step. "I would never." "You will." His hand shot out, gripping her wrist with bruising force. "Because if you don't, I'll ensure your precious staff suffers. Old Thomas in the stables. Mrs. Chen, who's been your housekeeper since you were a child. Accidents happen, Margaret. You of all people should know that." Terror and rage warred within her. She'd been so blind, so trusting. "There are 100 people in this house," I'll scream. "And tell them what? That your loving fiancé brought you to a candlelit conservatory?" Darius's smile was cruel. "They'll think it's romantic. By the time anyone realizes something is wrong, it will be too late." Margaret's mind raced. The conservatory had multiple exits, but Darius stood between her and the main door. The side entrance led to the gardens, but in this snow, in her evening gown, she wouldn't make it far. She needed to stall to think. "If you've planned this so carefully," she said, keeping her voice level despite her racing heart, "why tell me everything? Why not just forge the documents?" "Because I want you to know." His eyes glittered in the candlelight. "I want you to understand exactly how thoroughly you've been fooled. Your father thought he was so clever, keeping you isolated here, educating you himself. He made you smart but naive, trusting, easy to manipulate." "He was protecting me," Margaret whispered. "From what? From people like me?" Darius laughed. "No, my dear, he was protecting something else, something he found on one of his expeditions that he should have left buried." Before Margaret could ask what he meant, the temperature in the conservatory plummeted. The candles flickered wildly, and her breath misted in the suddenly frigid air. Darius's confident expression faltered. "What?" he began. The glass dome above them shattered inward with a deafening crash. Margaret screamed, throwing her arms over her head as shards rained down. But instead of feeling the bite of broken glass, she felt something else, a rush of wind, the sensation of being lifted, of strong arms encircling her. When she opened her eyes, she was on the far side of the conservatory, unharmed. Standing between her and Darius was a figure that defied explanation. He was tall, impossibly tall, with hair as black as midnight that fell past his shoulders. His clothing was archaic, a long coat of midnight blue velvet over dark breeches and boots, all of it seeming to absorb the light rather than reflect it. But it was his face that stole her breath, angular and aristocratic, with skin like pale marble and eyes that gleamed crimson in the candlelight. Eyes that promised both salvation and damnation. "You dare," the stranger said, his voice resonant with barely contained fury, "to threaten what is under my protection." Darius had gone white as snow. "No, it's impossible. You're just a legend, a fairy tale." "Am I?" the stranger smiled, revealing elongated canines. "Then you have nothing to fear." He moved with inhuman speed, crossing the distance between them in a blur. Darius tried to run, but the stranger caught him by the throat, lifting him effortlessly off the ground. "Please," Darius choked out. "I didn't know. I thought the stories were just..." "Stories?" The stranger's laugh was devoid of warmth. "Yes, I suppose I have been relegated to myth. How convenient for those who would prey upon the innocent." His grip tightened. "But legends, Darius Blackwell, often have teeth." "Wait," Margaret found her voice, though it shook. "Don't kill him, not here, not like this." The stranger's crimson gaze swung to her, and she felt the weight of centuries in that look. Ancient, powerful, infinitely dangerous. "You would show mercy to this creature who plotted your destruction." He sounded genuinely curious. "I would avoid having a murder in my conservatory and the scandal that would follow," Margaret said, surprised by her own boldness. "Whatever you are, whoever you are, I'm grateful for the intervention, but there are better ways to handle this." For a long moment the stranger studied her. Then, surprisingly, he nodded. With a casual flick of his wrist, he sent Darius flying across the conservatory. Her former fiancé hit the far wall and crumpled, unconscious but breathing. "As you wish," the stranger said. He turned to face her fully, and Margaret fought the urge to step back. "Though I suspect you will regret that mercy before this night is through." "Who are you?" Margaret whispered. He bowed, the gesture elegant and antiquated. "I am Ilian Corvus, Lord of the Northern Territories and King of the Nightborn." His smile was sharp as a blade. "And you, Margaret Ashford, are in considerably more danger than you realize." "The Nightborn," she repeated, her mind struggling to process. "You mean vampires? You're saying vampires are real?" "Very real." Ilian moved closer, and she caught a scent like winter wind and ancient libraries. "And very interested in you specifically." "Why, I'm nobody, just an orphaned heiress." "Just," his laugh was bitter. "Your father didn't tell you anything, did he? About what he found in the Carpathian Mountains 20 years ago? About the treaty he signed in blood?" Margaret's head spun. "I don't understand any of this." "No," Ilian said softly, "but you will. The question is whether you'll survive the learning." Outside the conservatory, screams erupted from the direction of the ballroom. Not festive shrieks of delight, but genuine terror. The sound of glass breaking, of furniture being overturned, of chaos. Iliane's expression darkened. They're here already, I had hoped for more time. Who's here? What's happening? Your Christmas celebration, Iliane said, crimson eyes meeting hers with devastating intensity, has just attracted the attention of my enemies, and they have come to collect what they believe is owed to them. He extended his hand to her. You have a choice, Margaret Ashford. Come with me willingly and I will protect you, answer your questions and perhaps keep you alive. Refuse and face the Covenant alone. The Covenant. A faction of my kind who believe your very existence breaks ancient law. His hand remained steady, waiting. Choose quickly. They are not known for their patience. Margaret looked at his outstretched hand, at Darius's unconscious form, at the shattered glass littering the floor. From the ballroom the screams continued. Her guests, her friends, were in danger. If I go with you, she said, will you help them, the people at the party? Iliane's expression shifted, showing what might have been respect. You bargain even now. Always, Margaret said firmly. Very well, my people will ensure the humans come to no harm. You have my word. She knew she should be terrified. Should refuse, run, find some rational explanation for the impossible. But Margaret had spent her whole life trusting her instincts, and right now, those instincts said that this vampire king, this creature of legend, was somehow safer than the alternative. She placed her hand in his. His skin was cool, his grip firm but careful, as though she were made of spun glass. Then I accept, Margaret said. Iliane's smile was triumphant and terrifying. Hold on. Before she could ask what he meant, the world dissolved into shadow and rushing wind. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was the Christmas lights of Wintermere Estate fading into the distance, and the last thing she heard was Iliane's voice, impossibly close. Welcome to the world your father tried so desperately to keep from you. Then there was only night and speed, and the feeling of falling into an abyss from which there might be no return. Margaret woke to silence. Not the peaceful quiet of a winter morning, but an absolute absence of sound that pressed against her eardrums like deep water. She opened her eyes to find herself in a bed, a massive four-poster affair with curtains of midnight velvet, in a room that belonged to a different century. The walls were stone, hung with tapestries depicting hunting scenes and celestial maps. Candles burned in iron sconces, their flames unnaturally still. A fire crackled in a hearth large enough to stand in, but it provided no warmth. The air was cool and carried the scent of old books and something metallic that made her pulse quicken. Blood, the room smelled faintly of blood. You're awake, a voice said from the shadows. Good, we have much to discuss. Iliane stepped into the candlelight, and Margaret's breath caught despite herself. She thought perhaps the events in the conservatory had been some kind of fever dream, that her mind had conjured the impossibly beautiful vampire king. But no, he was very real, very present, and watching her with those unsettling crimson eyes. Where am I? She sat up, relieved to find she was still wearing her evening gown, though someone had removed her shoes and the pins from her hair. What happened to my guests? You are in Ravencross Keep, my primary residence, and your guests are safe if somewhat confused. Iliane moved to a side table and poured deep red liquid into a crystal goblet. When he caught her alarmed expression, he added dryly, Wine. I'm not quite the monster you imagine. You're a vampire, Margaret said flatly. You crashed through my conservatory roof, nearly killed my fiancé. Former fiancé, I should hope. And kidnapped me to your castle. Forgive me if my imagination runs wild. Iliane's lips curved. Fair enough, but I didn't kidnap you, Margaret. You came willingly. There's a difference. Because you said people were coming to kill me. She threw back the covers and stood, gratified when he took a step back. You promised answers. Start talking. For a long moment, Iliane simply studied her. Then, surprisingly, he nodded and settled into a high-backed chair near the fire, gesturing for her to take the opposite seat. 20 years ago, he began, your father, Edmund Ashford, led an expedition into the Carpathian Mountains. Officially, he was searching for rare minerals for his railroad empire. In truth, he was hunting for the Sangreal Codex, an ancient text rumoured to contain the secrets of my kind. Margaret settled into the chair, her mind racing. Her father had always been secretive about his travels, but she'd assumed it was simple business discretion. Did he find it? She asked. Yes, along with something far more dangerous, me, wounded and trapped by vampire hunters from the Covenant. Iliane's expression darkened at the memory. Your father could have left me to die. Instead, he freed me. Why would he do that? Because Edmund Ashford, for all his flaws, believed in honour, and because I made him an offer. Iliane leaned forward, firelight painting his pale features in shades of amber and shadow. The codex for his life and a treaty between our peoples. I would protect his bloodline, and in return the Ashfords would guard one of our most sacred artefacts. Margaret's hand went to her throat, where she'd worn a pendant since childhood, a strange silver amulet her father had given her on her 7th birthday, making her promise never to remove it. The necklace. The sanguine star, Iliane confirmed. A relic of immense power, created when the first vampires walked the earth. It can grant immunity from our bite, reveal us in our true forms, or, in the wrong hands, be used to destroy every vampire in existence. The weight of the pendant suddenly felt like an anchor. And you let my father keep this, why not take it yourself? Because the star cannot be held by one of the Nightborn, it would incinerate us on contact. Iliane's smile was grim. Your father's protection was the only thing that kept it, and by extension my entire race, safe. The Covenant has spent 2 decades searching for it. When Edmund died, the trail led to you. The carriage accident, Margaret whispered. Darius said. Darius Blackwell was hired by the Covenant to infiltrate your household, earn your trust and retrieve the star. Iliane's voice was cold. The accident that killed your father was their first attempt. When that failed to reveal the amulet's location, they took a more subtle approach. Margaret felt sick. Her entire engagement, every tender word and romantic gesture had been a lie. How long have you known? I've had watchers on Wintermere Estate since your father's death. When Blackwell appeared, I investigated. By the time I confirmed his true allegiance, he'd already proposed. Iliane's jaw tightened. I've been searching for the right moment to intervene. Tonight forced my hand. The people who attacked the party. Covenant enforcers. They planned to use the celebration as cover for an assault, eliminate you, retrieve the star and disappear before anyone understood what happened. He stood, pacing to the window. Beyond the glass, Margaret could see snow falling over a landscape of dark forests and distant mountains. I managed to drive them off, but they will return. The Covenant doesn't forgive and they don't forget. Margaret touched the pendant, feeling its familiar weight. So what happens now? You're the Vampire King. Can't you just order them to stand down? The Covenant answers to no crown, Iliane said bitterly. They believe themselves guardians of vampire purity, protectors against corruption. They see the star as an abomination that should be destroyed, along with any human who knows of its existence. You're saying they won't stop until I'm dead? Yes. The single word hung in the cold air. Margaret stood, moving to the window beside Iliane. Up close, she could see faint scars on his hands, silver against his pale skin. Even immortal creatures, it seemed, bore the marks of old battles. You said my father signed a treaty in blood, she said slowly. What exactly did that entail? Iliane was quiet for a long moment. A bond, not of blood in the feeding sense, but of duty. The Ashford line would protect the star, and the Corvus line would protect the Ashfords. When you were born, that bond extended to you. So you're obligated to keep me alive. It's not just obligation, he said, and there was something in his voice that made her look up sharply. His crimson eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw something vulnerable beneath the regal bearing. Your father was my friend, Margaret, one of the few I've had in 5 centuries of existence. When he died, I swore to him that I would ensure you lived to choose your own fate, not the one the Covenant wants for you, and not the one Blackwell tried to force upon you. My own fate, Margaret repeated. She looked down at the pendant again, thinking of all the years she'd worn it without understanding its significance. And if I chose to give them the star, would that end this? They would kill you anyway, Iliane said bluntly. You know too much, and even if they didn't, the act of surrender would doom my people. The Covenant would use the star to hunt us to extinction. So my choices are, wear this pendant and spend the rest of my life running from vampire assassins, or hand it over and doom an entire species. I'm afraid so. Margaret laughed, though there was no humor in it. Happy Christmas to me. There is, Ilian said carefully, a third option. She turned to face him fully. I'm listening. The bond between our families was meant to last generations, but the original treaty contained a provision neither your father nor I anticipated needing. He took a breath, unnecessary for one who didn't truly need to breathe. If an Ashford and a Corvus were to marry, the bond would become permanent, unbreakable. The star would be protected not by treaty, but by blood union. Margaret stared at him. You're proposing marriage. I'm proposing survival, Ilian corrected. The Covenant, for all their zealotry, respects the old laws. A blood marriage cannot be undone except by death of both parties. They would have to kill us both simultaneously, a considerably more difficult task than eliminating a single human heiress. You mean it would be difficult to kill you, Margaret said. I'd still be mortal, fragile. Ilian's expression became unreadable. The blood marriage ritual involves an exchange. You would drink from me and I from you. It wouldn't make you fully Nightborn, but it would grant you extended life, enhanced healing and protection from most forms of harm. He paused. It would also bind our lives together. If I were to die, you would follow within days, and vice versa. That's insane, Margaret breathed. You're suggesting I tie my entire existence to someone I met 3 hours ago. Yes, Ilian said simply. I never claimed it was a perfect solution. Margaret turned away, her mind reeling. Outside, the snow continued its silent fall, covering the world in pristine white. How many times had she stood at her own windows at Wintermere, watching this same snow, dreaming of adventure, of a life beyond the careful boundaries her father had drawn. Be careful what you wish for, she thought bitterly. What would this marriage entail, she asked, besides the obvious mystical bonding and shared mortality? You would be Queen of the Nightborn, Ilian said. Joint ruler of all vampire territories, with all the responsibilities and dangers that entails. You would live here at Ravencross, though you could visit Wintermere when safely escorted. Your human servants would be under my protection, and you would have my loyalty, my resources, and my word that I would never force you into anything you didn't choose freely. But not love, Margaret said quietly. Ilian's silence was answer enough. No, he finally said. I can't promise love. I've lived too long, seen too much. I'm not sure I remember how. His crimson eyes found hers again. But I can promise respect, partnership, and fidelity, both political and personal. I would take no other consort, and I would expect the same from you. How romantic, Margaret said dryly. I've had romance, Ilian said. Centuries ago, it ended in ash and heartbreak. I won't lie to you with pretty words and false promises. This would be a marriage of necessity, yes, but it would also be real, binding, permanent. Whatever happens, we would face it together. Margaret studied him, this ancient creature who'd crashed into her life and turned everything she knew upside down. He wasn't offering her a fairy tale. No Prince Charming, no happily ever after. Just survival, duty, and the cold comfort of alliance. It should have been an easy refusal. But then she thought of Darius, with his practiced smiles and murderous plans. Of the life she'd been leading at Wintermere, comfortable and constrained, never questioning the boundaries her father had set. Of the pendant she'd worn all these years, never knowing it marked her as both guardian and target. I need time to think, she said. Of course, you have until... The door to the chamber exploded inward. 3 figures swept into the room, moving with the same inhuman speed as Ilian. They were vampire, that much was clear from their pale skin and predatory grace, but where Ilian carried himself with regal authority, these newcomers radiated barely controlled violence. The leader was a woman with silver hair bound in complex braids, wearing armor that looked like it had been forged from starlight and shadow. Her eyes were not crimson but pure black, without whites or pupils. Ilian Corvus, she said, her voice carrying the weight of judgment. You stand accused of treason against the ancient laws. Surrender the human and the sanguine star, and your death will be swift. Ilian moved instantly, placing himself between Margot and the newcomers. Seraphine, I should have known the Covenant would send their executioner. You were warned, Seraphine said. The treaty with the Ashfords violated our most sacred principles. We allowed it because you were king and because Edmund Ashford knew how to keep secrets. But now he's dead, and this girl threatens everything we are. Margot threatens nothing, Ilian growled. She's an innocent caught in a conflict she didn't choose. She wears the star, one of Seraphine's companions snarled. She knows our secrets, that makes her a weapon. Then I claim right of sanctuary, Ilian said. She is under my protection. Your protection means nothing, Seraphine interrupted. Not anymore. The council has voted, Ilian. They've stripped you of your crown. You are no longer king of the Nightborn. The words hit like a physical blow. Margot saw Ilian sway, saw something break behind his eyes. On what grounds? He demanded. Abandoning your duties for a human, allowing the star to remain in mortal hands, defying the Covenant's direct orders. Seraphine's black eyes were merciless. The council is already choosing your successor, someone who understands that humans are food, not friends, not allies, and certainly not worthy of a vampire's protection. You can't, Ilian began. It's done. Seraphine drew a blade from her belt, its edge gleaming with silver. Now surrender the girl or we take her by force. Margot's mind raced. Ilian had just lost his throne, his power, because of her, because he'd honored a treaty with her father. The logical thing would be to surrender to save himself. Instead, he raised his hands, and shadows seemed to pool around his fingers like living things. If you want her, he said, his voice dropping to a lethal purr, you'll have to go through me. So be it, Seraphine said and attacked. The fight was unlike anything Margot had ever witnessed. Ilian moved like liquid darkness, faster than her eyes could track. Shadows erupted from his hands, forming barriers that Seraphine's blade couldn't penetrate. But the Covenant enforcer was relentless, her strikes precise and devastating. The two vampires who'd accompanied her circled, looking for an opening. Margot knew she should run. Every survival instinct screamed at her to flee while they were distracted. But where would she go? She was in a vampire king's castle, former king, her mind corrected grimly, surrounded by hostile territory and wearing a pendant that marked her for death. Besides, something in her refused to abandon Ilian. He'd lost everything defending her. The least she could do was not make it meaningless. Her hand went to the sanguine star, and the pendant grew warm beneath her fingers. In that touch, something shifted. The world seemed to slow, and she could suddenly see things she hadn't before, threads of power connecting the vampires, pulsing with dark energy. The star was showing her their true nature. And something else, a weakness. The two companions flanking Seraphine weren't as strong as they appeared. They were sustained by her power, tethered to her like puppets. If Seraphine fell, they would follow. But how could Margot possibly? The pendant flared hot, and understanding flooded through her. The star didn't just reveal vampires, it could repel them. It was a weapon, one her father had worn disguised as jewelry for 2 decades. One she'd never learned to use. Until now. Margot didn't think, she simply acted. Ripping the pendant from her neck, she held it aloft and focused on the feeling of heat, of power, of desperate need to protect. The sanguine star blazed to life. Light erupted from the silver amulet, pure and searing as the sun. The two lesser vampires shrieked and staggered back, smoke rising from their skin. Even Seraphine faltered, raising an arm to shield her black eyes. Only Ilian seemed unaffected, protected by whatever bond he'd formed with Margot's father years ago. Impossible, Seraphine hissed. No human can wield the star. I'm an Ashford, Margot said, surprised by the strength in her own voice. We've guarded this relic for 20 years. Did you really think we did it without learning its secrets? That was a complete bluff. She had no idea what she was doing, but Seraphine didn't need to know that. Ilian used the distraction to strike. His shadows coalesced into solid forms, serpents of darkness that wrapped around the two lesser vampires and slammed them into the stone walls. They hit with sickening cracks and didn't rise. Seraphine snarled, her composure finally breaking. You dare betray your own kind for a human. I dare defend someone under my protection, Ilian shot back. As I have always done, the Covenant has forgotten what it means to have honor. Honor, Seraphine's laugh was ugly. You speak of honor while wearing the face of a monster. We are predators, Ilian. We feed on humanity. We don't marry it. Maybe that's why we're dying out, Ilian said quietly, because we've forgotten how to be anything but monsters. For just a moment, something flickered in Seraphine's expression, doubt perhaps or old grief. Then it was gone, replaced by cold determination. The Covenant will come for you both, she said. This isn't over. No, a new voice agreed from the doorway, but it's about to change. Everyone turned. An elderly vampire stood at the threshold, leaning on a gnarled staff. His hair was white as snow, his face lined with centuries of age, something Margaret hadn't realized was possible for their kind. He wore robes of deep purple, embroidered with symbols that seemed to shift when looked at directly. Ilian's expression transformed from battle fury to shock. Cassius, but you've been in the deep sleep for 50 years, yes. Cassius entered the room, his ancient eyes taking in the scene. I woke when I felt the crown's bond severing. The council acted without consulting the elders. That invalidates their decision. Seraphine's face went white. The elders have no say in. The elders are the foundation upon which the council was built, Cassius interrupted, his voice cracking like a whip despite its age. We may choose to sleep, but we never relinquish authority, not while the Nightborn exist. He turned to Margaret, and she felt the weight of his gaze like a physical thing. So, this is Edmund's daughter, you have his eyes. You knew my father, Margaret asked. I was there when he freed Ilian, when the treaty was signed. Cassius smiled faintly. A remarkable man, stubborn as they come. I see you've inherited that trait. Along with his talent for attracting trouble, Margaret said dryly. That earned her a genuine laugh. Indeed, Ilian, I assume you've explained the situation. Most of it, Ilian said carefully. I proposed a blood marriage, but Margaret hasn't had time to. I accept, Margaret said. Everyone stared at her. You've what? Ilian looked stunned. Margaret lowered the sanguine star, though she kept it clutched in her hand. I accept the blood marriage, on one condition. Name it, Ilian said immediately. You get your crown back. She looked at Cassius. If I'm going to be queen of the Nightborn, I'd prefer my husband actually be king. No offense. Cassius's laugh echoed through the chamber. None taken. And yes, once the blood marriage is complete, Ilian's restoration will be automatic. The bond with the star's guardian is more powerful than any council vote. That's why they acted so quickly, Ilian said, understanding dawning. They knew if we married, they'd lose any chance to depose me. Precisely, Cassius turned to Seraphine. You've been outmaneuvered, executioner, accept it gracefully. Seraphine looked between them, her expression caught between fury and something that might have been reluctant respect. Finally, she sheathed her silver blade. The Covenant will protest, she said. This isn't over. It never is, Cassius agreed, but they'll accept it. Eventually, they have no choice. Seraphine's black eyes fixed on Margaret. If you fail, if you prove unworthy of the star, I will be the first to remind the king of his true nature. We are vampires, we do not bow to humans. Good, Margaret said calmly. I wouldn't want a consort who bowed to anyone. Despite herself, Seraphine's lips twitched. You might survive after all, Ashford. She turned and swept from the room, collecting her fallen companions as she went. When the door closed behind them, Margaret felt her knees go weak. Ilian caught her before she could fall, his arms surprisingly gentle. That was incredibly brave, he said softly, and incredibly foolish. I've been told I inherited my father's stubbornness, Margaret managed. You're certain, Ilian searched her face. Once we do this, there's no going back. Your life will be tied to mine for better or worse. Margaret thought of Wintermere, of the life she'd been living, comfortable, constrained, controlled. She thought of Darius and his plans, of how close she'd come to a marriage that would have destroyed her. At least with Ilian, she knew where she stood. He'd been honest about what he could offer. Respect, partnership, protection, no false promises, no pretty lies. Maybe that was the most romantic thing of all. I'm certain, she said. Besides, someone needs to make sure you remember how to be more than a monster. Iliane's expression softened in a way she suspected was rare. I'll try to remember that's meant to be encouraging. If I may, Cassius said, we should perform the ritual now, before the Covenant has time to mount a more organized opposition. Agreed, Iliane looked at Margot. It will hurt the exchange, I won't lie about that. I've survived this evening so far, Margot said. I think I can handle a little pain. Cassius moved to the center of the room and began drawing symbols on the floor with something that glittered like crushed diamonds. The blood marriage is one of our oldest rites, he explained as he worked. It creates a bond that transcends death itself. You will share strength, share life, share fate, but you will not lose yourselves. Your minds remain your own. Romantic and terrifying, Margot murmured. Perfect combination. Iliane took her hand. Last chance to reconsider. Instead of answering, Margot placed the sanguine star in his other palm. His skin didn't burn. The pendant simply rested there, glowing softly. The star accepts you, Cassius said, wonder in his voice. I've never seen it do that before. She's an Ashford, Iliane said, something like pride in his voice. They've never done things the conventional way. The ritual circle was complete. Cassius gestured for them to step inside. Margot's heart hammered as she and Iliane moved to the center, facing each other. The symbols around them began to glow with pale blue light. Join hands, Cassius instructed, and repeat after me. The words were in a language Margot didn't recognize, ancient and flowing, but somehow she understood their meaning, a pledge to stand together, to share burdens and victories, to face the darkness side by side. When they finished the first part of the vows, Iliane raised his wrist to his mouth. His fangs extended, Margot tried not to flinch, and he bit down. Dark blood welled, impossibly red against his pale skin. Drink, he said softly, offering his wrist. Margot hesitated only a moment before pressing her lips to the wound. The blood was strange, cold, but somehow warming as it went down. It tasted of winter nights and ancient forests, of power barely contained. The world tilted. She felt Iliane's memories flooding into her, centuries of existence, of battles and losses, of a younger vampire who'd still believed in hope before the world taught him cynicism. She felt his loneliness, vast and aching, his determination to honor a promise to a dead friend, his surprise at discovering he genuinely wanted to protect Edmund Ashford's fierce, clever daughter. Then it was her turn. Iliane bit her wrist. There was pain, sharp and bright, but somehow not unbearable, and drank. She felt him experiencing her memories, childhood at Wintermere, her father's stories and lessons, the grief of losing him, the stifling years that followed, her dreams of adventure, of meaning, of a life that mattered. The bond snapped into place like a key turning in a lock. Margot gasped as power flooded through her. She could feel Iliane's presence in her mind, not invasive but there, a steady warmth. Their heartbeats, her still beating, his barely a whisper, synchronized. The sanguine star, hanging around both their necks, now blazed brilliant silver. The light filled the chamber, pushing back shadows, and for a moment Margot saw the room as it must have been centuries ago. Not a vampire king's austere quarters, but a proper royal chamber, warm and alive. Then the light faded, and it was over. Iliane caught her as her knees buckled. Easy. The first few minutes are disorienting. Disorienting, Margot repeated. She could feel his amusement through the bond and couldn't help laughing. That's one word for it. It is done, Cassius said, satisfaction in his voice. Congratulations, your majesties. The Nightborn have their king and queen. Margot looked up at Iliane, her husband now, in a way that made her brief engagement to Darius seem like a child's game. His crimson eyes met hers, and she saw uncertainty there. This ancient, powerful creature was unsure of her. Somehow that made everything easier. So, she said, what now? Now, Iliane said, we deal with the fallout. The council will resist. The Covenant will make trouble. Your human life will need to be managed. Wintermere can't be left unattended, and you'll need a plausible story for your disappearance. I died in a tragic accident during the Christmas party, Margot suggested. Happens all the time to orphaned heiresses. Actually, Cassius said, I'd recommend a long recuperation abroad, give you flexibility to appear when needed. And Darius, Margaret asked, will wake with no memory of vampires, treaties, or his true mission, Ilian said, a dangerous edge to his voice, but with a strong desire to confess his embezzlement schemes to the authorities. The Covenant's hold on him will be broken. Good, Margaret felt no sympathy for the man who'd planned to murder her. There's something else, Ilian said. He looked uncomfortable, which Margaret was learning to recognize through their bond. The blood marriage, it doesn't require. That is, the physical aspect isn't necessary for the bond to. Ilian, Margaret interrupted, are you trying to tell me this is a marriage in name only unless I choose otherwise? Yes, he said, relieved. I won't force that on you, ever. Margaret considered him, this vampire who'd given up his crown to protect her, who'd been honest about his limitations, who was trying so hard to give her choices in a situation where she had so few. I appreciate that, she said, and I think we should take time to know each other, build something real if we can. If we can, Ilian echoed. Through the bond she felt his hope, fragile as spun glass. But Margaret continued, I'm not opposed to the idea, eventually, when we're ready. The look on his face made her glad she'd said it. For now, Cassius said, tactfully breaking the moment, you both need rest. The ritual takes a toll, even with vampire resilience. Margaret, your body is adjusting to the changes. You should sleep. As if his words had given her permission, exhaustion crashed over Margaret like a wave. Ilian caught her again. She was going to have to stop making that necessary, and guided her back to the massive bed. Sleep, he said softly. I'll keep watch, you're safe here. We're safe, Margaret corrected. That's the point of the bond. His smile was small but genuine. Yes, we're safe. Margaret's eyes closed, and she fell into dreams filled with shadows and starlight, ancient castles and new beginnings. She felt Ilian's presence through it all, a steady anchor in the darkness. When she woke, dawn was breaking beyond the windows, her first dawn as Queen of the Nightborn. 3 months later, snow fell softly on Ravencross Keep, transforming the dark castle into something from a winter fairy tale. Margaret stood at the window of what had become their chambers. She and Ilian had moved into larger quarters befitting joint rulers, and watched the sunrise paint the sky in shades of rose and gold. Behind her, she felt rather than heard Ilian approach. The bond made them constantly aware of each other, though they'd learned to give each other privacy when needed. Admiring the view, he asked, wrapping his arms around her waist. Margaret leaned back against him, still marveling at the warmth she felt through their connection, thinking about how different this is from 3 months ago. Regrets? Surprisingly few. She turned in his arms. The council is manageable, Wintermere is being run beautifully by Mrs. Chen, and I've only had 2 assassination attempts. By vampire standards, I'm doing well. 3 attempts, Ilian corrected. You didn't notice the poisoned wine last week. That was poison. I thought it just tasted bad. His laugh was warm. Over the past months he'd been laughing more, the ancient weight he carried growing lighter. Margaret liked to think she had something to do with that. What about you? She asked. Regrets about marrying a stubborn human who keeps reorganizing your library? That depends. Are you going to keep alphabetizing my grimoires? Absolutely, chaos offends me. Then I regret everything, Ilian said, but he was smiling. He pressed a kiss to her forehead, then her cheek, then, hesitantly, her lips. It was gentle, questioning. Over the past months they'd been building something neither had expected, genuine affection, even love. It was new and fragile, but it was real. When they pulled apart, Margaret touched the sanguine star, which hung around both their necks on a shared chain. They'd modified it after the wedding, a symbol of their united guardianship. I have news, she said. Cassius believes the Covenant is ready to negotiate a formal treaty. They've seen that the Nightborn haven't fallen apart with a human queen. And Seraphine sent a gift, actually, a very old book on vampire history. I think it's her version of an apology. Or a threat, Ilian said dryly. I choose to be optimistic. You're allowed to be, you're human, but his tone was fond. They stood together, watching the snow fall and the sun rise, vampire king and human queen, bound by blood and growing into something neither had anticipated. You know, Margaret said thoughtfully, if someone had told me at that Christmas party that I'd end up married to a vampire king, I'd have thought they were mad. And now, Margaret said, I think it's the sanest thing that's ever happened to me. Ilian pulled her close, and through their bond, she felt what he couldn't quite say yet, that she'd become essential to him, that somewhere in the past 3 months, obligation had transformed into genuine love. She felt it because she felt the same way. Outside, the sun continued to rise, bringing light to even the darkest corners of Ravencross Keep. Inside, 2 rulers stood together, proof that even in darkness there could be hope. Even in winter, there could be warmth. Even in a nightmare, there could be a future worth fighting for. Want more stories of unexpected romance and supernatural adventures? Follow for new tales every week. If you want to watch the full extended stories, join my Patreon. The link is in the description below. Exclusive and uncensored episodes are available only on Patreon. Check the link in the description.